Du kannst reden, dann danach Pause, das jetzt übersetzt für Sie, was du geredet hast. Genau. Und dann,
aber du hast mir mal gesagt, einmal.
Ja, stimmt ja auch.
Ja, aber das habe ich mir dann gemerkt. Ich habe gar nicht verstanden.
Du wirst ja hier nicht husten ins Mikro, sondern dann bist du ja weg.
I'm sorry.
Dass du das gemerkt hast, das finde ich, also, das muss man erstmal Bewusstsein schaffen, genau. Das geben wir auch nicht sagen.
Schönen guten Abend, herzlich willkommen im Namen der Münchner Stadtbibliothek. Mein Name ist Margit Lindner und ich arbeite in der Programm- und Öffentlichkeitsarbeit und freue mich sehr, heute diesen Abend zusammen mit dem Netzwerk Morgen. Neben mir steht Songül Akpınar vom Vorstand des Vereins und Paolo Cesar von der Geschäftsleitung. Wir haben gemeinsam heute Abend einen Vortrag und haben dazu eingeladen Hamira Kobusingye. Sie lebt in Uganda und wir freuen uns sehr, dass wir sie hier online zuschalten können. Sie wird ihren Vortrag auf Englisch halten, wird aber auf Deutsch über Kopfhörer übersetzt auf Wunsch. Diese ganze Veranstaltungsreihe ist Teil eines ganzen Wochenendes zum Thema Klimagerechtigkeit, Gendergerechtigkeit. Heute, wie gesagt, der Vortrag von Hamira Kobusingye. Morgen gibt es einen Workshop mit Corinna Toledo in der Stadtbibliothek Bogenhausen und am Sonntag als Abschluss eine Podiumsdiskussion im Bellevue de Monaco. Wird vielleicht Paolo noch ein bisschen mehr dazu erzählen. Das Ganze ist eine Zusammenarbeit mit Global engagiert in München, Netzwerk Morgen, der Münchner Stadtbibliothek, Bellevue de Monaco. Ich gebe jetzt weiter an Songül Akpınar und wünsche Ihnen einen guten Abend.
wir müssen ein bisschen Pause machen, damit die Übersetzung auf Englisch zu Hamira kommt. Also dann kann Songül weiterreden.
Hello, I welcome you to this evening, and next to me is Mr. Akpınar from the Morgen e.V. Organization, and today's project is going to be about climate justice and gender equality. And our speaker today is going to be Hamira Kobusingye from Uganda. And we're happy to have you today. And we're happy to have you tonight. She's going to talk. She's going to talk in English, but for anyone who needs an interpretation, we can do that via headsets. And today we're going to have this project, which is a collaboration with Morgen e.V. And tomorrow there's going to be another project in Bogenhausen with Corinna. And on Sunday we will have a discussion, a table round discussion. And but Mr. Akpınar is going to talk about this later a little bit more. And thank you for being here tonight.
Jetzt sind wir soweit. Hallo alle zusammen, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, auch die online heute dabei sind. Seid ihr herzlich willkommen zu unserer diese Woche einfach eine sehr gute und wichtige Veranstaltung für uns, auch heute und morgen und auch übermorgen. Weil wir wissen auch, wie wichtig das für uns ist, dass Klima und Gerechtigkeit und gleich die Gender natürlich. Heutzutage müssen wir nicht alles irgendwie vergessen. Wir müssen alles berücksichtigen, damit, dass die Gendergerechtigkeit auch gegeben, dass wir über andere Themen, über andere Gerechtigkeiten auch sprechen, nur nicht über diese Themen. Ich bedanke mich auch ganz herzlich im Namen von Morgen. Wurde ich kurz vorgestellt, aber ich heiße Songül Akpınar, bin die Vorstandsvorsitzende von Morgen und eine andere Kollegin von mir, die Mathilda. Ja, mit dem Familiennamen ist immer sehr schwer, ist das, aber ich begrüße auch unsere tolle Referentin, die aus Uganda, die Hamira. Muss ich das nochmal lesen? Ich glaube, Hamira Kobusingye ist das. Herzlich willkommen und werde ich damit jetzt meine Kollegin Mathilda geben. Sie wird das kurz vorstellen und mit dem Programm von dieser Woche, der Paolo wird sehr detailliert darüber sprechen und bitte, wenn ihr auch heute viele da seid, sollt ihr auch morgen, übermorgen sehr viele einfach mit uns zusammen die Veranstaltung verfolgen, weil wir nächste Woche auch Rassismuswoche haben, damit das nicht vergessen wird. Danke nochmal. Schönen Abend.
Also, sorry, also ich bin selber leider noch nicht ganz vorbereitet. Ich komme gerade aus einer Berlin-Reise. Also die Veranstaltungen, die wir machen zum Thema Klimagerechtigkeit, sind deshalb so wichtig, weil die oft vergessen werden. Also dieser Zusammenhang zwischen Armut, Klimagerechtigkeit, Rassismus und Gender wird oft nicht richtig dargestellt. Also die hängen schon immer sehr eng zusammen. Und deshalb ist es wichtig, dass man heute bei unserer Veranstaltung dabei ist und auch die nächsten Tagen. Und also ich bedanke mich auf jeden Fall bei der Stadtbibliothek, dass die uns nochmal die Räumlichkeit zur Verfügung stellen. Und ich freue mich, gekommen sein und auch die online sind, dass sie uns verfolgen. Gibt's noch was? Und trotzdem sage ich noch einmal, nicht vergessen, dass man am Sonntag wählt. Ganz wichtig für uns. Also die Migrationsbeiratswahl findet am 19. März statt. Die ist deshalb so wichtig, weil es viele Leute gibt, die nicht die Möglichkeit haben, an die Kommunalwahl also teilzunehmen und zumindest bei der Wahl der Migrationsbeirat ihre Stimme geben können und somit auch die Stadtpolitik beeinflussen kann. Danke.
Hello, a nice welcome from me. And I want to welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone who is with us online. And I want to welcome you to our week, this project week, and for today, tomorrow, and on Sunday, we will have these projects. And it's about climate and climate justice and how important it is, and about the gender equality debate. And we're not allowed to forget these things, and we have to consider everything and not forget about anything. And we also have to address other related topics as well. And thanks for I will say thank you for tomorrow in advance, as there's also a project. My name is Sorgi Apina, and but I will give the microphone now to my colleague Matilda. And but I also want to say thank you for Hamira Kobusingye from Uganda for being with us, and I want to welcome you as well. And Matilda is going to tell you a little bit more about the about the project, and about what is next week. And Paulo's also going to say something about today later. And as we all know, that next week is Racism Week. And Matilda speaking. Thank you for having me here today. And I'm sorry I'm not really prepared. I just came from Berlin, and today's topic is about gender, the climate justice, and which we often forget, but it's related to not just the climate justice, but also to racism, to the gender discussion. And it is often addressed in a wrong way. And thank you for being here today. And today it's important that we will have this today, this project, and next day also something planned. So thanks also to the city library for giving us this opportunity, and welcome to everyone, and also who's joining us online. And what is important on Sunday is the Migration Council. That means for people who normally cannot be involved in election or voting, you can vote give your vote in the Migration Council and shape with us how city policy can look like. Thank you.
Ich glaube, das wurde alles schon gesagt. Also ich würde sagen, Hamira, the stage is yours, and let's begin.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Hamira Kobusingye, and I am from Uganda. Thank you for having me today. It is an honor to present to you about gender justice and climate justice, being a climate activist. And I think Paulo has my biography, my short bio. So I'll try and share my screen. As I am trying to share my screen,
And now, could you share your screen? So now we don't see your picture, but your screen. Try it, please. Ой-ой-ой, она вообще отвалилась. So. Hamira hat keine Verbindung mehr, sie ist offline, sie kommt gleich wieder, hoffe ich. There is no internet connection with Hamira for a while. We hope she comes back soon to us. Now. So now you're again here.
Apologies. I think you made the phone.
Maybe I make so you're a co-host now.
Okay.
Then you can make your screen shared.
Okay. Can you
Что это? Что это? Что это? Что происходит? Ну, почему так? Close. So you can begin then on a presentation without presentation, and I make it for you. Maybe. Мне Павел ее прислал куда-то.
I think someone can help me share my slides
Yes,
from that end.
yes,
'cause I'm
I
not
can
sure.
show your slides for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Because I'm having a lot of trouble with things.
Recording in progress.
So like we said, okay, just wait. My name is Hamira Kobusingye, and I put together this presentation, Climate Justice, a Global Perspective on Gender Justice, because I am a climate and gender justice activist and also a human rights defender. This presentation is going to have are you sharing it?
Yes, I share here in the hall.
Oh, okay, great. So will we be moving at the same time? Okay.
Okay. Okay, I will share it also in Zoom.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Climate justice is a concept that emerged in the 1980s, which seeks to address the disproportionate impacts of climate change on marginalized and vulnerable communities. This entails representation, inclusion, protection of rights, and of those most vulnerable to the effects of the climate change. Solutions must promote equity, assure access to basic resources, and ensure that young people can live, learn, play, and work in a healthy and clean environment. We all know by now that climate change affects communities disproportionately. Hence we have the global south and global north, and communities have been impacted very differently. And then gender justice is a concept that seeks to address the unequal power dynamics between genders, which can be seen in how women and girls are disproportionately impacted by the climate change. Gender justice entails ending the inequalities between women and men that are produced and reproduced in the community, in family, in community, in market, and in the state, in state places. I think it was last year when the UN produced a report that said women are 14 times more vulnerable to impacts of the climate crisis compared to men, and that is really a heartbreaking issue, because as women, we constitute half of the population on the planet, and we have also noticed that we are very few in decision-making areas. But let me continue the presentation. Climate justice from the global south. Climate justice is in the global south requires promoting community-led development practices that are based on local knowledge and sustainability. This is what I usually call tailor-made solutions that are real to different communities. For example, here in Uganda, where I come from, if you introduced an electric car, it wouldn't be effective for the communities that are starving and are facing water scarcity, where people are living in risk of ending up under a pool of water during the rain season like we are in now, right now, where farmers are unsure of their produce coming out during the dry season because there's so much sunshine. So it would be to the global south, it is a very unrealistic solution. Yes, it is a solution, but very unrealistic to people in communities like mine. The global south calls for climate policies that are equitable and prioritize the interests of vulnerable communities. I think this is also self-explanatory because we also need to have the vulnerable communities know what they need most and tackle that issue and prioritize what they need and how to build on that. Addressing climate justice in the global south requires tackling issues such as poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment, and hence climate justice. That's what climate justice means to our communities, because we are underdeveloped while we are trying to survive the impacts of the climate crisis, adapt to the climate crisis, mitigate the climate crisis, and also combat the climate crisis, the climate change. We are also looking forward to developing our communities because communities need to feed. Our countries need to develop, and that is what is climate justice to us. The global south has a climate justice perspective due to being more impacted by climate change despite contributing less. We all know, for example, Africa has contributed less than 4% of global greenhouse gases, but yet we suffer the most. Our next subheading is gender justice and climate justice. Also, in my previous slide, while I was explaining that we suffer the most, recently last week, Malawi just suffered a huge Hurricane Freddy, and we all know Malawi contributes less than 0.5% of global CO2 emissions. Here in Uganda, when it rained yesterday, it was very dangerous that so many people, it was dangerous to travel on the road. And this is our reality of an everyday person in the global south. Like, it's very dangerous for us to survive in this extreme climate crisis, hence the need for climate justice. We're going to also look at gender justice and climate change. Gender justice is an essential component of climate justice. Climate change disproportionately affects women, particularly those in developing countries, due to their socio-economic status, cultural roles, and limited access to resources. Just to give you an explanation, in Africa, as a general, women are responsible for feeding the communities regardless of any family setting, whether there's mom, dad, and children, whether there's children and mom, where there's father and children, where there's a daughter involved. It's always going to be, they're always going to look to the girl or to the woman in the family for what to feed on. So it becomes more hard and 100 times harder for women to survive in these families, because when there's scarcity of food and scarcity of water, they are the ones supposed to walk the extreme miles to look for water. They're the ones who are supposed to scratch and look for feeding and for food for the families. And it's so hence every time there's a food scarcity or a food shortage or a water scarcity, and these are all impacts of climate crisis, it is the women that are suffering and facing the biggest impact, because it's already a burden to them that they were then supposed to provide for their families. Now they have to go through all the hurdles and the complications that come with looking for food when there's food scarcity and hunger. For example, the one we had in Karamoja, or we're still having in Karamoja till date, and the hunger that is happening and the drought that is happening in the Horn of Africa. So my next point is women are more likely to live in poverty, have less access to education and healthcare, and have limited decision-making power, which puts them at greater risk of the impacts of climate change. For those that don't know, there are very few women that are in the decision-making rooms in making policies that combat climate change. And every time there are a particular number of people is not represented, that means decisions that are made are not in their favor. And that is really heartbreaking because we know women are more impacted, and every time there's a crisis, for example, here in the Global South, so many girls are pulled out of school. There's so much early marriages in our communities. And this is really heartbreaking because so many girls are losing out on their preferably brighter futures to get married and provide food for their families, to go fetch water and look for water to take care of the families. And this is not a safe environment for young girls when there's in the time of a climate crisis and climate change. Climate change exacerbates existing gender inequalities. On so many occasions, I have mentioned that when there's a climate crisis, it pushes the feminist movement or the gender movement 10 decades back. It pushes us back to early child marriages. It pushes us back to child brides. It pushes us back to gender violence. It pushes us back to domestic violence. It pushes us back to all the wrong things that were being done to women 10 decades ago, which is unsafe for us or for the next generation or for any woman to survive. Climate change also affects women's health and safety. Like I mentioned, women in so many communities here in my country have to travel so many kilometers to look for just water and food. And during that trek and that journey, they find themselves being probably molested. If they're children, they're molested. If they're older women, they are raped along the way. And it's unsafe for them to survive in such a community, hence having more unwanted pregnancies, having more and like diseases, because during the rape there's sexually transmitted diseases such as HIV and all the rest that come with that. Also, and also it introduces new inequalities and new problems for the woman in general. Policies that account for gender differences can assist women in coping with and reducing the impact of climate change. When we introduce policies that account for gender differences and also know that what we need in the fight for gender justice is gender equity and gender justice, then women will at least have a particular percentage of justice in their lives, and their livelihoods will change. They'll be treated different in their workplaces, and also they'll be assisted better. A study was made a few years back where they found that 49% of global farmers are women, and they are not well known and they don't usually register success because they don't receive as much resources as their counterparts that are in the farming industry. So if we introduce policies where women are helped and given resources and educated how to better farm, we also reduce on food wastage in the farms. We reduce on food wastage and we increase on food produce from their gardens, which in return increases on the food and reduces on food scarcity. And also it means there's very little food wastage. There's also employment for women, and there's all these children that are going to school because their mothers are working. And also it means, because also food wastage is a major contributor to methane, which contributes to climate change, it reduces the emission of methane into the atmosphere, hence reduce combating the climate crisis. So basically empowering women and assisting them and providing them with enough resources as their counterparts in their fields of probably farming in this example, because farming also helps reduce food scarcity and food shortages. It means we are hitting some like 4 birds with 1 stone. We're combating the climate crisis, we're empowering women, and we're sending children to school. But also, most of all, we are combating the climate crisis by reducing on food wastage that is wasted in gardens and farms that women run because they have very few resources to have their produce come out. Tackling both climate and gender justice is essential for building a more sustainable and equitable global society. We all know that women train, when you train a woman, you train a nation, and women train the next generation, because in most communities, women are the ones that are nurturers, they're the ones that nurture children, and we know charity begins at home. So if we're trying to train kids on how to reduce their carbon footprint and make sure they do not litter, and make sure they stay away from plastics or anything and fossil fuels that contribute to the climate crisis, we start by empowering women and making sure they are in a good place to train the next generation. Hence, we don't repeat the mistakes the generations before us did, and hence we have a generation of empowered women and knowledgeable children. Next slide, please. Climate justice and gender-sensitive policies. Climate justice must also be linked to gender-sensitive policies, which recognize the particular needs and vulnerabilities of women and girls. And this goes back to involving women in decision-making, because it is only a woman that has lived the experience or lives the experience of a woman that can better make decisions for policies of women and girls, and hence reducing their vulnerability. Thank you. The next is gender-sensitive policies must ensure that women and girls have access to resources, education, and decision-making power. In order to ensure that they are able to participate in the decision-making process and benefit from the outcomes of climate and climate justice initiatives. What do I mean by this? It goes back to my point of helping women access resources by empowering them through education, by letting them access decision-making rooms and decision-making power. That way they make decisions for women, and women have a say in what is being enforced on them. And also the process, they have to be part of the process from the word go. We don't have to just wait for them at events to tell them, okay, now come and listen to this. We have to be there in the preparation of these policies. And this will benefit the outcome for climate justice, because climate justice entails justice for all of humanity. And we also make sure there are no human rights abused, there are no gender rights abused, there are no children's rights abused. And this is done by involving women in decision-making processes and also in decision-making and giving them the power to make these decisions, but also empowering them to make these decisions. Climate justice in conclusion, climate justice from the Global South must take into account the particular needs and vulnerabilities of women and girls, and must ensure that their voices are heard in the decision-making process. That is why we as activists speak up. That is why so many women are coming to speak up, because we know if we do not, the generations after us are not safe. And that is not a planet to live for our children, and so many human rights will be abused. Climate justice initiatives must be linked to gender-sensitive policies, which recognize the particular needs and vulnerabilities of women and girls, in order to ensure that they are able to benefit from the outcomes of climate justice initiatives. That's my conclusion. And also, before I finish, I should also drive you to the project drawdown and the research that was made. If girls are educated and women are empowered, there's a lot of CO2 that is being, a lot of emission that is being reduced because we empower the women and also we empower them to become great fighters for our planet and great fighters for a better and peaceful environment. Thank you. I also know I'm supposed to talk about the eco project. I will just say something about it. Is that fine? Can I go ahead?
Is this okay? Yeah. Thank you very much, Mira. There is question here im Saal. Diese Frage. Eine Frage, ganz kurz.
Kann jemand übersetzen, der junge Mann vielleicht? Also Folgendes, wenn ich richtig verstanden habe, Sie sprachen eben halt, dass Sie die Frauen mehr Bildung brauchen, um sparsamer oder ökologischer mit den Ressourcen umzugehen in Uganda. Habe ich das richtig verstanden?
You just said that women need more or higher education to know how to manage resources in Uganda. Is that right? Did I understand you right?
Yes. I meant that women need to be educated and sensitized about, and also, yes, they need education and to know what is happening. She got me right. Also, we also need to sensitize them about the climate crisis and what is happening so that they can better combat it.
Ich habe die Antwort nicht richtig verstanden in Englisch.
Sorry.
Wer kann das übersetzen, bitte?
Ja. Ja, Sie haben mich richtig verstanden. Ich glaube, dass es durchaus mehr Bildung für Frauen bedarf, um an diesem Problem zu arbeiten. Danke.
Wie erklären Sie sich, dass hier in ganz allen Industrieländern eben halt hohes Bildungsniveau gibt und dementsprechend eben diese Ressourcenverwendung also total verschwenderisch ist eben und hier das meiste Müll in allen Industrieländern produziert wird und in Ländern der sogenannten Süden eben abgelagert werden, also auch der ganze Atommüll und so weiter. Wie ist die Verbindung und auch dass eben auf der individuellen Ebene so was auch natürlich notwendig ist, aber auf der individuellen Ebene nur eine Lösung zu finden. Aber die Politik weiterhin erlaubt, große Mengen an Plastik unter anderem eben halt zu produzieren.
I asked myself, how do you we have this paradox that, for example, in industrialized countries, we have the higher degrees of education, generally speaking, and whereas we see that people are very wasteful with these resources, as, for example, much more disposal trash that is at the end gets disposed in the so-called south of the world. And I asked myself, where can we connect the relations between these two? Because on the one hand, we have people, how can you as an individual find a solution for that? Whereas on the other hand, we have policies that allow big corporations to produce plastic in masses.
Thank you for that question. That's a very good question. That is a problem that we are still also facing and being partnered with. But that is why people like activists exist. That's why we're pushing policymakers. That is why we have to hold policymakers accountable, because they have created a world or a system where polluters and pollution and climate change enablers have the luxury to abuse the planet and to abuse the environment. And this is why we are always out here on the streets, and we are always striking, and we are always calling policymakers, politicians, corporations, and we are calling them out and asking them to actually take control of what they are doing, because they are abusing the planet, and in return it is us that suffer, it is the communities that suffer. But also us as people, we need to try and reduce our carbon footprint. While we do that, we also need to hold corporations and hold policymakers and politicians responsible. And that is something I have been advocating for from the word go, that while we are doing our best in the communities, while we are doing our best to sensitize communities, to clean up, do community cleanups, do beach cleanups, do tree plantings, whatever we are trying to get involved in doing all these things, we also need, as women, as youth, as activists, as people that care about this planet, we need to hold corporations responsible. We need to hold them responsible. And we also need to hold the politicians and the policymakers responsible. And when the numbers are many enough, when the numbers are big enough, trust me, they will have no reason to ignore us, but to just act on what we are asking them to act on. That is all I ask for, and that is where we need to head as a team and as a group of people that care about the tomorrow and the next generation, but also that care about the planet and the environment. We need to hold corporations and communities accountable. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank für diese Frage. Ich glaube, dass wir alle noch immer mit diesem Problem konfrontiert sind. Und das ist der Grund, warum wir hier draußen sind, warum wir auf der Straße sind als Aktivistinnen und Aktivisten, und warum wir die Politiker entlarven als die Dinge, die sie tun, und oder die Systeme, die sie kreiert haben, die unseren Planeten verschmutzen. Und die Art und Weise, wie sie unsere Umwelt und unseren Planeten misshandeln. Und das ist, warum ich hier stehe oder als Aktivistin auf der Straße gehe, und um eben diese Politiker für ihre Handlungen verantwortlich zu machen. Und um die Kontrolle darüber zurückzugewinnen, was unserer Umwelt angetan wird. Aber auch auf einer persönlichen Ebene sich zu fragen, wie kann ich meinen persönlichen CO2-Fußabdruck minimieren. Und das versuchen wir, indem wir bestmöglichst versuchen, dagegen anzukämpfen, also in Form von was wir tun, Gemeinschaften wieder auf Vordermann zu bringen, indem wir Müll entsorgen oder Strände zu säubern von Müll oder Bäume pflanzen. Und es ist unsere Aufgabe, uns darum zu kümmern. Und glauben Sie mir, wenn ich sage, wenn unsere Zahl als Gegner dieser Systeme und dieser Politik steigt, werden sie nicht mehr länger uns ignorieren können, die Politiker, und sie werden uns wahrnehmen müssen. Und das ist alles, was ich hierzu sagen möchte. Ich glaube, es ist wichtig für uns als ein Team zu agieren und als Gemeinschaften uns für eine gesunde Umwelt und Planeten einzusetzen. Danke.
Es gibt eine zweite Frage hier. Nur zu erklären, also bei den Fragen und Antworten werden dann konsekutive übersetzt, nicht simultan.
Ja, vielen Dank für Ihren Vortrag. Sie haben ja davon gesprochen, wie wichtig es ist, Mädchen und Frauen zu empowern. Können Sie uns Initiativen vorstellen, die es dazu gibt in Uganda? Also Initiativen, die zum Ziel haben, Mädchen und Frauen zu empowern, sie irgendwie mehr auch in ein selbstbestimmtes Handeln zu bringen?
Thank you very much for your presentation. You talked about how important the empowerment of women is, and I wanted to ask you if there are initiatives in Uganda that are being taken for the empowerment of women and young girls, and what they can do about it.
Thank you very much for that beautiful question. Yes, there are initiatives being done, and there are so many organizations. For example, the organization I founded, Climate Justice Africa, empowers girls and women, and I also have colleagues that have organizations that have dedicated themselves to helping young girls and women in rural communities receive sanitary towels and receive the school supplies they need to stay in school, and also the help they need and the counseling they need, especially those who have been threatened by early child marriage, or those who have been displaced by the climate crisis or climate crisis incidences such as flooding that happened in Malabar, or even feeding communities that have not received food. So yes, there is so much being done, and we can actually discuss probably after this. Someone can share my email and we can discuss more. But yes, there is so many people and so many human rights defenders like myself, environment defenders like myself, that are doing their best to empower women and make sure the generation that they are safe, and even the younger girls are also safe and have a better tomorrow, and their futures are secure and they stay in school. Yes, thank you.
Ja, danke schön für die. Dankeschön für die Frage. Ja, es gibt sehr viele Organisationen, die sich damit beschäftigen, die ich selbst auch gegründet habe. Vor allem geht es darum, den Mädchen dabei zu helfen, ihre Schulausbildung zu bekommen. Und wir beschäftigen uns auch vor allem mit den Mädchen, die als Kinder verheiratet wurden oder die ihr Land verloren haben und deswegen umziehen mussten. Es gibt auch die Organisationen, die sich darum kümmern, die Gemeinschaften zu ernähren, zum Beispiel. Also ja, es wird sehr viel unternommen. Ich kann das jetzt hier leider nicht ins Detail eingehen, aber ich kann auch gerne meine E-Mail-Adresse teilen und dann kann ich das auch gerne genauer erläutern. Aber es gibt auch auf jeden Fall, also wie gesagt, viele Organisationen und auch sehr viele Aktivisten, wie ich selber, die eben dafür aufstehen, dass Frauen ermächtigt werden und dass vor allem junge Mädchen eine bessere Zukunft haben und dass ihre Zukunft sicher ist. Dankeschön.
Gibt es noch Fragen? Hier.
Hallo, danke schön für den wirklich ausführlichen Vortrag. Ich frage mich, inwiefern die LGBT-Community auch betroffen ist von dieser also Klimagerechtigkeit, Klimaproblematik.
Yep. Thank you very much for your detailed presentation. I'm asking myself how the LGBTQ plus community is impacted by the climate change, by the climate crisis that is happening.
I have not connected with any people from the LGBT community, so I'll be lying if I answered that question, because I am not the right person to speak for them, because I'm not well informed and I have not associated with them to know very well what they're going through. Thank you.
Ich muss leider sagen, dass ich nicht in Verbindung zu jemandem aus der LGBTQ+-Gemeinschaft stehe und deshalb möchte ich da lieber nicht drauf eingehen, da ich nicht gut informiert darüber bin. Danke.
Gibt es noch Fragen? Ist noch Fragen? Hast noch eine Frage?
Noch eine Frage, die Bevölkerung in Uganda ist durchschnittlich ziemlich jung. Wie geht es den älteren Menschen in Uganda in Bezug auf die Klimapolitik und Klimaproblematik?
So the population in Uganda is pretty young. What about the older people? How are they impacted by the climate problems?
Thank you very much. With that question, I'll give a story, probably something my grandmother shared with me. And when we're talking about the climate change and what is happening, while everyone else was calling me all sorts of names and not believing it's actually happening, or not believing what we're going through is a climate crisis, my grandmother was actually saying, I actually understand what you're saying, because in the same land, in the same farm I used to grow crops, I can no longer yield enough crops. Where I used to plant beans and probably get kilos and kilos and kilos of beans in return, now I just get very little. Like, the crop yield is very little. The land is so barren nowadays, and even the sun is not reliable, even the weather is not reliable. We used to have seasons, and I remember seeing her eyes tear up when she talked about it, because she was saying, we had food, we fed our families, we even fed neighbors, we even fed communities, but we can't do that right now. We never worried about what we planted because it always yielded. But now we are cast, of course she called it a curse, we are cast to the doom of not being sure if our crops will come out, because when the sun comes, it's so hot and the crops dry up. When the rain comes, it's too much that the seeds die in the ground, and the soil, they die in the soil and they don't germinate. And I remember her tearing up, and a tear. I'm like, and this is one story of my grandmother. I have listened to stories of other people, other elder people, and they are saying the same thing. It used to be beautiful. It used to be safe. Food used to not be something you struggled to get. Feeding your family didn't have to depend on how much money you had, but just depended on how early you woke up, how much you cultivated your land, how well you cultivated your land, how well you harvested. And we cannot even depend on Mother Nature anymore to take care of us. And that is the worst part of it, because they cry, she was crying, and she was telling me, and I'm not heartbroken for me because I have very few years to live. I am heartbroken for you and your children, you who still has so many years to live. How are you going to survive? How are the rest of your peers going to survive? Because the planet is not being as motherly as it was. And when you explain all this, it makes a lot of sense, because frankly, we have not been good children to her. And so in short, that's how I can summarize how the elderly people in my community and in my country are being affected. Thank you. Danke schön.
Danke.
Vielen Dank für diese Frage. Ich möchte hier an der Stelle eine Geschichte erzählen, die meine Oma mir erzählt hat, und zwar bezüglich des Klimawandels. Es ging um, wie unsere Ernten langsam und aber sicher nicht mehr zuverlässig sind und wie einst die Jahreszeiten, die zuverlässig waren, dass es nicht mehr der Fall ist. Und man hat früher also es war genug da für jeden. Man hat mit seiner Ernte eine ganze Gemeinschaft ernähren können. Und man hat nicht über diese Dinge nachgedacht, aber das hat sich nun geändert, denn unser Planet ändert sich und die Ernten sind nicht mehr, absolut nicht mehr zuverlässig. Und was wir auch bemerken ist, es ist einfach, dass das Klima und das Wetter spielt nicht mit. Wenn zum Beispiel die Samen ausgesät werden und eine Flut, also es Flutwetter ist und zu viel Wasser durch Regenfälle, die Samen können nicht keimen und es wächst nichts. Und aber meine Oma hat auch erwähnt, dass es ihr, auch wenn es sich alles so dramatisch verändert hat, es ihr nicht für sie leid tut, denn sie sagt, ich werde nicht mehr lange auf diesem Planeten sein, aber ich mache mir Sorgen um dich und um deine Kinder und die Generationen danach, denn wie werdet ihr überleben, wie werdet ihr mit diesem Problem zurechtkommen? Und sie erwähnte auch, dass Mutter Natur nicht länger mehr nicht mehr so mütterlich zu uns ist, aber das ergibt auch Sinn, denn auch wir sind keine guten Kinder mehr für Mutter Natur. Wir behandeln sie schlecht und das sind die Dinge, die sie genannt hat. Danke.
Thank you, Hamira. There is no more question here. I asked Ramira to talk about the East African crude oil pipeline, and she will talk about a little bit, because it's very interesting, and our technique will show a card from the pipeline. Okay, Ramira.
Thank you very much.
Übersetzung, wichtig schon bestanden. Oder? Ja.
Ja, eine Übersetzung? Okay. Wir werden nun uns ein bisschen unterhalten über die ostafrikanische Rohöl-Pipeline und wir werden dazu jetzt auch gleich eine Karte zeigen. Genau.
Echo? Hello? Is it my turn?
Yes.
Okay. Screen.
We hear you.
Yes. I'm trying to. So I am trying to share my screen.
Ich werde nun meinen Bildschirm mit Ihnen teilen.
Can you see it now?
Können Sie das sehen?
Yes.
Okay, great. What is ECOP and
Also was ist
shifting fossil sources to Africa means to the continent and the climate crisis? The East African crude oil pipeline,
die
also having an acronym called the EACOP, also known as the Uganda-Tanzanian crude oil pipeline, it is intended to transport crude oil from Uganda's oil fields to the port of Tanga. Once completed, the pipeline will be the longest
wird die längste
heated crude oil pipeline in the world.
Pipeline der Welt sein.
It will cover 1,444 kilometers from Hoima in Uganda to port of Tanga in Tanzania. It will emit more than 34 million tons of CO2. That's estimated to be 30 times more than what both Uganda and Tanzania are currently responsible for. Its ownership is it's owned by the Uganda National Oil Company, which is 15%, and advised by the Standard Bank. Tanzania's shares are Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation with 15% and also advised by the Standard Bank of South Africa. The China National Offshore Company with 8% and advised by the Imperial Bank of China, and Total Energies with 62% and advised by, I think it's advised by Standard. I'm not sure the bank that is advising Standard, but we have so many players. There's a link I'll probably share later with Paulo. This is the map of the pipeline. It's going to come from Tanga, all from Hoima, Lake Albert, all the way to the Indian Ocean, and we see it's going to go through so many water bodies. It's going to go through the Kazinga Channel that drains into Lake Victoria, and it's also going to go through on the shores of Lake Victoria. And with the so many oil spills we have seen in the past years, it doesn't stop us from worrying as environmentalists and climate defenders. Why are people and the environment in danger due to the eco? The people are in danger because they are already facing displacement. They're already facing loss of income, and we have so many people that have been moved and have not yet been compensated by Total, and people that were having farms to grow crops on, they were rearing their produce, they were taking their children to school. They have all been displaced, and even the money that they were compensated with cannot buy a sensible plot of land in the nearby areas, which becomes very hard for them to relocate to any other place. There's also loss of income. Because the most of the oil fields are in Lake Albert, there are so many fishermen that used to fish from Lake Albert. There are so many people that used to grow coffee, people that used to farm coffee and grow coffee, and all these sources of income were stopped because there's a pipeline that is going to be constructed. And you can imagine, and we're sure that Total will not take on all these fishermen and the farmers, because they're not trained to work in an oil field. There's a loss of property. Of course, like I said, people lost their land. They lost crops and produce that was being grown on the land. People lost their animals that were being grazed. Someone that was farming coffee lost out on their coffee because they can no longer grow coffee anymore. There's destruction of biodiversity, that is destruction of living and livelihoods. For example, their children, that schools were closed in the Kabale region, and for a long time they were striking last year because they weren't going to school, because schools were destroyed, schools were demolished, and this destroys their living, day-to-day living. But most of all, it worries me that if schools are demolished, that means also health facilities are being demolished, and we have women, we have children that need health care. So it puts the health of mothers and children and even fathers and human beings in general at risk. There's a loss of cultures. We know Hoima is a home for so many cultures, a home for so many people. And because of this oil pipeline, there's so many migration being created and displacement. Hence, people are losing their cultures. They have to mix with different cultures, and that is also a big destruction of heritage and ethnicity. Also, health complications, like I mentioned. Health facilities were also demolished, and now we are not sure where the women are going. How healthy are they? And then environment, there has been encroachment on Bugoma forest. There has been encroachment on water bodies, on wildlife. There's been encroachment on the wildlife. Chimpanzees are being disorganized because there's a road going through the national park and they can't cross over to meet each other. And because chimpanzees are like human beings, incest is not advisable for them. So there is a lot of wildlife that is being affected. What we have witnessed. So this is the Niger Delta. This used to be the Niger Delta before before Shell and BP moved to Nigeria to put up their oil fields. And this is the situation right now. Look at this beauty and look at what they have right now. This is what is happening in Nigeria and Port Harcourt right now. Families are being reduced to that kind of destruction. The environment is being reduced to that kind of destruction. Imagine you could grow crops in the above picture, but you cannot grow crops here anymore because the land is full of oil. The fish is already dying. This is biodiversity being lost right here. And what we ask for is there must be immediate energy transition. And for there to be immediate energy transition, there must be climate finance and loss and damage reparations to help the global south transition to better energy. The debt for climate should also be catered for. And when I talk about debt for climate, I mean, on so many occasions, for example, Malawi had the Hurricane Freddy that is happening in Malawi. Malawi is going to find herself borrowing so much money from the IMF and the World Bank to deal with the losses and the damages that they have incurred. And the IMF and the World Bank will register this as actually a loan. And we all know this is a climate crisis that we did not cause. Like I mentioned earlier, I am very sure Malawi's emissions don't even go above 0.5% of global CO2 emissions. And they are left to deal with the crisis like this. And we need debt cancellation and we need debt to be cancelled. We need loss and damage reparations. We know the facilities there. Now we need the money to be put in there and it should be used. And also the global leaders should stop playing games on climate finance. They should provide the climate finance because it is reasons like this that countries like Uganda are considering investing in projects like the Eco Pipeline because they claim they need sources of income. They need to grow the economy, and that is what when the Paris Agreement sat down, that is what climate finance was supposed to be for in the beginning. But because there is delay in climate finance, we're having countries make rational decisions like investing in fossil fuels. That is a deadly investment for the communities and the lives of the people. So the picture below is one of the pictures that introduced me to the fight against fossil fuels. These are children trying to go to school, and this is not fog, but this is actually soot in Port Harcourt. This is the soot they have to breathe in. A story that broke my heart was this father that was on national television, and he was explaining how he has a 3-year-old child, a 3-year-old daughter, and a 1-month-old son. And he says his daughter keeps on having respiratory issues. She's always coughing. She's always having breathing issues. And his son has soot in his nose every day. And you can imagine what kind of future these children are going to have, what kind of cancerous livelihoods these children are going to have. And this is the reason myself as an activist and as an environment defender and a human rights defender, I am so against the Eco Pipeline. But also, like I said, much as we're pushing our governments here in Uganda to stop the project and discontinue the project, we also need to call upon global north and major polluters to actually make good on their word and not look like and provide the climate finance for us to invest in more sustainable energy. Because every time we talk to someone, they're like, but the project is going to bring in a lot of work and a lot of employment for people. But then I always counter argue. I'm like, if the money that the loans that we are receiving to invest in a fossil fuel project, or where when there's a leakage or when things go bad, or after Total has finished cultivating all the oil she needs from our country, the aftermath of what we are going to deal with as a country is not safe for our people. This is the aftermath we deal with. This is what happens to our fish. This is supposed to be food, but you cannot consume it anymore. And you wonder why there's a food shortage. This is supposed to be a land for cultivation and growing crops and yielding future food for communities. But this is what our land is being they are subjected to. When Total and BP when there was a spill in the Niger Delta, they just packed up and left. Yet they gave in a few $1 million, but what is that to what the communities in Port Harcourt and the Niger Delta are facing right now? It was just a sprinkle of salt in a sprinkle of water in an ocean. There's so many respiratory issues. The aftermath is so deadly. And this is what worries me for the children and the women of my community. Dankeschön.
Thank you, Hamira, very much. There is no question about the presentation now. No, there is no question. Then thank you, Hamira, very much. But before, we have to applause. Yes, we can then say goodbye, Hamira. We see us in Sunday.
See you on Sunday.
Panel. And thank you very much, all people that are here. And then we see us Sunday.
See you. Thank you.
Ciao.
Dankeschön. Can I leave? Can I leave? Can I leave now?
Nein, hört auf. Danke. Wanda, Applaus für dich. Wanda.